I am Jeff Wedgwood, the teacher of the Scientific Evidence for Evolution class. This is class 3. I wanted to review the first two classes very briefly to lead up to what we're going to be doing today, especially when we get into talking about dating things and how difficult it can be to date them. Last time was really sort of the first true class. The first one was an introductory and sort of get to know you kind of thing. But in the last class, I defined evolution, and I defined Darwin's theory of evolution as descent with modification which can be inherited. The simplest way to state that is that children are not duplicates of their parents and display a variety of characteristics, which is very true with my two children. And the second thing was that he said that the mechanism was natural selection. The natural selection was the thing that was the most important part of his contribution, and you have to realize that this was at a time when they had no idea how inheritance worked. They didn't know about chromosomes or DNA or even nucleus. They didn't know about mitosis and meiosis, the two different forms of division. Mitosis is just make another one of me. Meiosis is divide into 4 cells, and while you're doing that, break apart the DNA so you have half. So that happens in sperm and an egg. And in egg, you end up with a large cell with some little cells that are supportive of it. And in the sperm, obviously, you just get basically DNA with a tail. And but he had no knowledge of any of that, and still was able to deduce or induce, I can't remember which way, he was still able to induce a full theory of evolution. There are two important things to point out. One is he was influenced strongly by, I believe it was Owens. Someone wrote a book of natural philosophy about geology. And he was fascinated by it. And in the book, it talked about finding strange bones or finding, weird things. So when he went on the Beagle and he stopped in Argentina, he went to a dig and he found, I can't remember which bone it was, but a thigh bone only like 10 times the size of the thigh bone of anything that he had ever seen. However, he was able to take that enormous thigh bone or whatever it was and find that the indigenous animals that were small were identical. So he hypothesized that this big bone used to be that animal, but a whole lot bigger. Malthus was a fellow who wrote a book before Darwin put his theory of evolution together. And in Malthus's work, he said, and I think I reviewed this, he said that if you have a fixed place, let's say you have 100 acres, and that's it, and you don't do anything about the rabbits that are, eating stuff in the garden, so to speak. So we've got a rabbit population over time. Now, one rabbit can have many litters of many babies, but let's just say that they can only have 4. So you have 2 adults producing 4 children. And what that means is instead of having a straight line of the number of rabbits, you have a line that goes like this. And it starts getting stratospheric quite quickly. And the way you can do this is the old trick where the emperor said, how do you want to be paid? And he said, well, put 1 piece of rice on the first square of a chessboard, 2 on the next square of the chessboard, and so on. That's this kind of a progression. However, if you get above a certain threshold, Why is this red? That's where foxes come in. And fox population is over here. And its food supply is limited at first, so it's not going to, fox time goes backwards. Fox time goes backwards this way. So they are going to sort of muddle along, and then when the rabbit population gets good, they're going to do this. Well, you can't do that, because if this many rabbits, this many foxes eats this many rabbits, the rabbits are suddenly depleted. They aren't there anymore. And so now what happens to the foxes? They die. Not quite so dramatically, but they die, and they come back down to an equilibrium point where there is now a balance of foxes and rabbits, an equilibrium.
Is that going to be forever?
If it's an enclosed space and there are no resource problems. Then he started looking at, well, what about the rabbit and the field? That's all interesting and well enough, but what about the rabbit and the field? Well, the field, I'm going to make the chart be the field, the diagram. Okay, we have one rabbit. Actually, I suppose we have to have two to start with. And we've got all of this vegetation that they can eat. So 2 becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16. Okay, you can see that the rabbits grow pretty darn fast. Does grass grow like that? Does grass just grow, and it's up? No, it grows gradually. And if you were to take the grass, if you were to make this a grass graph on this side, sort of superimposing it, you'd find that as the number of rabbits starts to do its thing where it goes out of sight. Keep getting off instead of blue. The problem is their food supply is static. They can eat it and then come back to it a week later, but the food supply, basically grass, if we were starting, with the whole thing filled, grass is going to diminish as they eat it. And so now there's hardly any grass in the field anymore. I know this sounds stupid, but what's going to happen to the rabbits? They're going to die. Again, they will find an equilibrium point where there's enough grass to support them. Now, this is where they are, and what I've labeled and everything is completely arbitrary. But the point is, Malthus said animals reproduce, if you don't restrict them or restrain them, reproduce in a geometric progression, and that resources, the things that animals eat, herbivores eat plants, carnivores eat herbivores. Because of those limitations, you always end up with this equilibrium. Well, what if now the rabbit population is stable? It's been stable for a while in this field with that particular grass. Wind or bird or whatever blows in a different kind of food. What happens to the rabbits? Well, if they're, I hate to say smart, but the basic idea is that if you look at the two together, you're going to find something that is a sort of an S-shaped curve and something that's sort of, a straight line. in terms of going the wrong way, straight line coming down from somewhere. Because that's the grass being eaten up. As soon as they get to the peak, the grass is at a certain level and sort of stays there. You give them new food, and then they can do this. Find a new equilibrium point. But what is the interesting thing about that? Well, it's a new food. It's a new environmental selector. It is a natural selector for the rabbits that can eat that food. Maybe some can, maybe some can't. Maybe some have a enzyme in their liver that will get rid of all the toxicity in that particular plant, and they can eat it for nutrition and have no problems whatsoever. Other ones don't. They die. That selection of the group, which will be able to eat the new food source, is natural selection.
Does this happen in a human being?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We haven't stopped evolving. I have, but we as a group have not stopped evolving. Okay, I really wanted to knock that home because those graphs are what really hit Darwin. When he saw that and he heard Malthus worrying about world population filling the world, and this is in the 1750s, I think, 1850s, it just didn't make, to Malthus, it didn't make sense not to have some kind of human selection of humans. Why let all of the, low life, multiply by like rabbits, and why do our elite only have 1 or 2 children, kind of thing? He wasn't really popular with some people for that. Any questions before I jump into today's?